Friends, welcome to The Writer's Journey. I'm your host, Lauren Moore, and with me is the dynamite Aileen Williams. We're two authors on a mission to learn more about writing with you, audience. So thank you for joining us. Tonight we're talking about how to work with cover designers to create the very best cover for your book. Our guest has considered this topic from all angles because she is a full-time cover illustrator and designer at Vivid Covers and the author of the epic fantasy series Oathbound. She's also the author of tonight's book spotlight, Cover Your Book, an author's guide to working with designers to maximize sales, and she's here to tell us all about it. Rebecca Haskell, welcome to the show.
I felt like we needed an applause track there, you know? We need some sound effects.
Let's do golf clap.
Make our own. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, your topic is super important, and it's one of those topics that, like, as authors, we think about how important it is to get a cover designer, but then once you're in the middle of working with one, hiring a professional for the first time, you find out there's a steep learning curve, and all of it's really important. And I'm kind of hoping that tonight we'll be able to cover some of those topics beforehand for some folks, so that they'll be able to get a really great working relationship with their designer in the future, or make the one that they have now even better.
I kind of feel like the cover of your novel, it should be the fun part of your publishing journey. I mean, I kind of feel like the learning curve for every part of self-publishing is kind of steep, but I feel like covers should be the fun part. That should be like one of the emotionally gratifying parts. And I think that if you consider it before you're in it, or before like you need to do it now, you know what I'm saying? If you can think about and learn about it a little bit and familiarize yourself a little bit with the industry and art and what it's expected and what you need, that sort of thing, I think it will be a much less stressful process than it would be otherwise. It shouldn't be stressful, and it really absolutely can be, but it doesn't have to be,
Right. It'd be a lot of fun. So tell us a little bit about your design background, what kind of books you work with, what kind of authors you work with.
Well, I've been graphic designing since I was in my late teens, and so a while. It's been a while. And I started into covers because I am a writer. I've been writing since about 2007. Did I move the mic?
Yeah, there you go.
How are we doing? Okay. I started writing seriously writing in 2007, and that was right before the Kindle came out and the indie thing happened. And so in the author groups that I was a part of, as the indie movement started to pick up steam, I actually remember as a writer thinking to myself, like looking at my book and thinking, well, self-publishing is an option now. And I remember thinking this stupid thought, I'm just going to wait and see how everything shakes out. I'm just like, now I think, oh my gosh, honey, you were just getting, I was just being chicken is what I was being. Anyway, so I had author friends who said, hey, I want to publish this myself, but I'm having a hard time figuring out what to put on the cover. You're a designer. You could help us out with this, And I saw that there were a few people doing it at the time. I started in 2013 is when I started designing for books. And then I slowly mostly shifted from just pure design, like design with, most design is photo composite. And I start illustrating more because fantasy and science fiction are just, those are my genres there. That's where my heart is. And so I started illustrating more, and I'm most of what I do is illustration now. So it's been about 7 years that I've been doing covers, and it's been a lot of fun. Just also because I get to, even though not in the capacity as an author, I still get to peripherally in my day job be part of the publishing revolution, which is just so exciting.
I know you got your work out there everywhere. I mean, that's the first thing people see is that cover. So
I'm really glad that we got you on the show as a cover designer, because we have one of our most loyal fans in the chat tonight, Shadow the Illustrator. She's your sister, and she's in the chat, and she's another great illustrator. And so, Shadow, tonight's episode is for you. We also have Jay Oliveira. We've got Leah Vaccaro. We've got Rick Partlow and Jay Clifton Slater. And we've got a full house. So welcome, everyone.
Whoa.
So, as an author who's also been a cover designer, how have your experience being on both sides of the equation shaped you as a cover designer?
I think that having been a writer and I understand the emotional relationship a writer has with what they've written with their book. Okay. I get that. I so get it. And I understand that emotional relationship, I think, is part of what can sometimes make it a little bit difficult to get what you need on a cover, but it can also, it also can be a benefit. Being able to see how much, our books are our babies, and understanding that emotional relationship that the author has with their book helps me, I don't know, I think treat it with a little bit more compassion, I guess, and understand how important it is. I mean, it is really, really important, and probably the most important thing, that you get a cover that's going to sell your book. I mean, that's huge, but it also needs to do that thing. For you, when you see the cover of your book and you see that cover on your book, you're like, yes, that's what belongs there. That's my book. That belongs on my book, and have that kind of emotional satisfaction. And I think that coming at it just from the pure art side of it, it would be hard to really conceptualize how much that means to an author, and the feeling of ownership that you have over artwork that is reflecting something that only existed in your brain. I think that's probably my favorite moment is when I have a client who gets to see something that has only ever existed in their own imagination, and they see it for the first time with their physical eyes. It's magical. It's magical. I live for that moment,
Yeah. I'm gearing up for that very moment, because our book 2 cover is going to have 2 of our characters with their helmets off, so we're actually going to be able to see them. And I'm just like over here with bated breath, like, let me see the Dracone.
From my experience, it's never quite what you had in your head, but sometimes it's almost better, if that makes any sense, because it's more real than the picture in your head. That makes sense.
So with that, because I mean, me already going in, I know what's in my head's not what's going to be on the page. So for authors out there who are like, this is exactly what it needs to be, what sort of like advice to them would you give to kind of like step back a little, because
that's kind of like asking like a mom to let go of her kids. Good luck with that one. But you do need a little bit of distance. I think that's one of the reasons why it's good to, if you have the flexibility in your publishing schedule, to be able to like let the book sit and maybe start working on another project before you come around to covering that first one, because it gives you the kind of emotional distance that it's the same sort of emotional distance that's useful when you're editing. And when you're really going to have to take a scalpel to that book and maybe cut some things that you don't want to cut. And it gives you that emotional distance to be able to do that. I find that's useful in getting your cover as well, because as much as we want the cover to be like just a visual extension of the book, that's not what it is. Covers are, their marketing is what they are. And you have to speak in the language that the cover is not actually for you as an author. It is for the person who might buy your book, who's thinking about it. That's who it's for. And it needs to speak to them. And sometimes your own feelings for what you want it to look like can get in the way. So what I would say is try to be just like super flexible. Be really flexible with the specifics of how you want it to end up. You know what I'm saying? I kind of feel like the hardest clients to work with are the ones who have been working on this book for 5 years or 10 years, it's because they've had a lot of time to think about it, and they think about exactly how they want it to look and exactly how the cover is going to look. And they're going to have this over here, and they're going to have this plot element in the background, and they're going to look exactly this way. The problem with that is that I'm guessing that you're probably, whatever your skills are, you're probably not also an artist, and you're probably not also a designer. And so making design decisions, what subject should be on the cover, the composition, color palette, typography, making those decisions when you don't have necessarily those skills what happens is you are robbing yourself of part of what you're paying for in hiring a cover designer. Is you are paying them for their expertise and their many, many, many years of knowing how images work and how people respond to the visual medium and how to make that work for you. So if you make all of those decisions beforehand and you kind of relegate your cover designer into the role of maybe like, well, we call it, in the design world, we call it, well, I got to be a Photoshop monkey today. You know, I mean, if you relegate your designer to the role of a Photoshop monkey and you're the one making all the design decisions, you're not able to take advantage of a good portion of what their value is as a designer. So
one big question that arises in my mind that I can see a lot of people maybe thinking is, what sort of choices me as the author do I have? As far as approaching, you as the expertise. It's like I've always envisioned it being like lots of green. Like what sort of I don't know. Does that make sense?
That when you're formulating your ideas of how, this is why I think it's important to start like finding information about it instead of just the daydreaming part. We all do the daydreaming part, early on, but like to actually educate yourself about what the purpose of a cover is. I have found that most authors don't understand what it's for. There are experienced authors, that don't really grasp what a cover is for, and that can handicap you. So if you can educate yourself more about that, so that when you're starting to formulate those pictures of, I'm imagining a lot of green, well, is your genre one that communicates with green, or is it going to be a contrary genre cue? Is it going to be signaling something else that maybe you don't want to? Like, for instance, let's say I'm coming from science fiction and fantasy. That's where my brain is most of the time. So let's imagine that you have magic on your cover. I recently went through this. I've been training another designer to work with me at Vivid Covers, and we were trying to put some magic on the page, and she wanted to go with green. And I was like, we're doing sci fantasy. Green magic is very it hints at the occult. It hints at witchiness. You see a lot more on like paranormal cozy mysteries. And on urban fantasy, that kind of, it has that witchcraft vibe to it. So if you want to go magic, we're probably going to want to do blue or gold. So we ended up going with blue, and because it just keyed in on the genre a little bit more tightly. And there's things like that you might not think of until you studied your genre, and studied what kind of symbols and what kind of visual language, because it really is a language. Covers are language. They're a lot more communication than they are necessarily artistic or creative expression. And the first thing that you need to think about when you're thinking of what needs to be on my cover is, I think most authors, they ask themselves that question, what should my cover look like? And they automatically go to, well, what kind of story have I, what is my story? I really feel like that's the wrong question. You need to be asking yourself, who is my audience? Because the knowledge of who your audience is going to inform what language you need to use in order to reel them in and get them to click on your thumbnail, get them to click on your book. Here's the order of operations. It's cover, blurb, first page. Cover, blurb, first page. That is how readers find your book. The cover gets them to consider your book at all in the first place. You speak with really broad, non-specific language in the cover to bring everyone in. And then the blurb will give them more specifics, and it'll narrow that group down a little bit more. And your first page will narrow them down even further. And that's kind of your order of operations. So you need to be able to speak to your potential readers in the language they understand on the cover, so that when they get to your blurb, they're the ones you're looking for in the first place. What you don't want is, a lot of times when people are saying, hey, I'm having trouble getting my ads to convert, can you help me figure out why? And a lot of them, if we're having click-through, if they're clicking through to the book, we know the cover's bringing them in, but something else, probably the blurb, is turning them away. So either the blurb's no good, or the cover is bringing the wrong audience in. And so when they're getting the blurb, they're like, oh, this is not what I thought it was. You know what I'm saying? So you can kind of do some diagnosis, some troubleshooting when you already have a book out there to see whether or not it's your cover or your blurb that's preventing people from hitting that buy button. But ultimately, and I understand that emotional need to have like that perfect cover you've always dreamed of on your book. And I kind of feel like to an extent you can get that. But ultimately, you're not selling art. You're selling your book. And so whatever artwork on your book is going to bring the right reader to your words. That's the artwork you want on your book, regardless of whether or not like the specific details are completely accurate to your book. I mean, honestly, we've all read like, and readers have been trained to this by traditional publishing. I can't tell you how many books I've read over my lifetime where the hair color of the
I was just thinking hair color.
The character in the book. But honestly, it never stopped me from reading the book. It never stopped me from buying it. Never stopped me from reading it. Sometimes once in a great while, I'd flip to the front and be like, that's not what I thought. You know what I'm saying? But by the time the reader I'm not saying that you shouldn't have the right hair color. If you can afford it, okay, go for all the customization you can manage. But if you can't, all is not lost, okay? If you've got to pick something off the rack, if you can only afford a pre-made and it's not quite right, don't worry. Because by the time someone knows that it's not quite right, they've already bought the book, you know? It's okay.
So that's... I was just saying... man! Oh, we're doing this tonight, huh? That's what's happening?
Yeah, Kayleen, you go.
Okay. I was just going to say, so, when you're coming to a designer and, you're like green and giant starships and big moon, and they're like, green might be good. I've seen a lot in your genre. How much research have you done? Listen to them. This is what they do for a living. Okay, go.
All right, so cover is not necessarily supposed to capture the heart and soul of your book and put it up on the internet.
Your book's supposed to do that.
It's also not necessarily supposed to accurately portray every single accurate detail, but it's supposed to reach to the right reader and to communicate to them, this is a book you want to read. So how do we, what if we're not sure what our reader is? What if we've written a whole manuscript somehow? It might happen, I don't know. And we're just not sure what our reader is. How do we figure that out? And then how do we find the right cover designer to reach that reader?
I think that this is where, sorry, I've got to stop touching this thing. Okay. I think this is where genre research really comes. There's, I know
it's a big question. It's loaded.
Huge question. If you have no idea what your genre is, I don't know how to help you.
I'll really quickly say my very first series, I wrote it not knowing anything about genre. Mm-hmm. I didn't know anything about genre until I was on book 3. And at that point, I'm like, oh, maybe I should start really figuring out who I'm targeting on this, because that's when I found...
Who wants to read this? Yeah.
Right, yeah. And it was a headache. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, find the themes. If you have magic, look at the fantasies. If you're in space, look at the sci-fis. Mm-hmm. If you've got mechas, look for mechas on covers. That's...
I think one thing that authors kind of get wrong is they expect genres to be specific.
And they're not.
Like they'll say, well, it's not exactly urban fantasy because I don't have the kick-butt heroine with the leather jacket. She doesn't wear leather jackets. Okay, that's not vital. So, I mean, it's common in urban fantasy, but it's not a make or break. Genres are very broad, and you can exist at the very center of it with every single trope for that genre, or you can be on the very, very edge of it, super quirky, off the beaten path type book, and still fall within the boundaries of that genre. One thing that I do want to say is I kind of feel like people get confused that trying to define their genre on theme or tone. I mean, their genre does sometimes draw on theme and tone, but just because there's romance in your book doesn't mean it's a romance. Just because there are funny parts doesn't mean it's humorous. Just because there's a fight scene doesn't mean it's action adventure. You know what I'm saying? If there is, I can't tell you how many times I've had a writer come to me and says, well, I don't know that there's a genre for my book because there's a mystery and there is some adventure and a hint of fantasy with the romantic thread, and there's this theme and it's a spiritual theme, and there's also some, psychological thriller, and then it sounds like you've written a book about humans, at that point. I mean, if you have all those threads in there, you've probably written a book about humans. But I think the only way to really figure out where your book falls is to honestly, it's to read. It's to read the books in the genres or subgenres where yours could fall. And I've written a little bit on the topic of trying to figure out your genre. And a lot of that has to do with why you're writing what you're writing. What itch are you trying to scratch? Because that's gonna form a lot of why you of why somebody else might read it, if that makes any sense. So yes, your genre is the big question, and I love it when authors come to me and they already know the answer to that question. It is a huge question, and it takes a lot of soul searching, because you're the only one who knows your book. Okay, for right now, tell other people who've read it, you're the only one who really knows it. So you're the best qualified person to figure that out.
So do your research, read in your genre, find other authors that you love that kind of write the kind of book you're looking for. And while you're researching, look at their covers. Covers that are selling well. Those books are selling well, and you think would kind of match your book too. What other kinds of homework? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you're in the research phase and you're trying to figure out, where my book is going to fall, and you're looking at all these covers, and you can say, my book could go underneath that picture, I mean, because the title could be anything, but that picture, that could be on my book. Once you feel that, start digging deeper into that area.
I guarantee you that there is a place for your book. I mean, it's very rare that a book is so wildly out there that there's not a place for it. For instance, before GameLit or Lit RPG was a thing, Tad Williams wrote these books called Otherworld. I think it was Otherworld. That's what it was called, right? I'm sure someone in the comments can correct me if I'm wrong. This was GameLit. It was somebody got sucked into a game, and they didn't call it GameLit or Lit RPG. They just called it science fiction, So there's a place for your book, no matter how quirky or strange it is. Whenever somebody comes at me with, well, there is no genre that my book fits into, I think, honey, you need to go back to the library, okay? And you need to read a little bit more, because I guarantee you there is a place for it. It's just trying to figure out that place for it. Sometimes what can be helpful to you is just like cataloging the features of your book, like what is the nature of the setting? What's the nature of like the main conflict in it? What is my protagonist like? And then looking for other books that have traits similar, because if you think about it, genre really is an artificial construct. It is. Genres are very artificial, and kind of non-specific, whereas a book is it's a whole world. It's a living, breathing thing full of, themes and tone and threads of nuance and all sorts of things. You could put so much into a novel. Novels are just living creatures that are unique to themselves. A book isn't science fiction. We call a book science fiction because it has enough traits that are similar to other books also called science fiction, if that makes sense. So when you're looking for genres, don't try to find a genre that completely encapsulates everything that's in your book, because it can't. It's a label, and labels by their nature are they're reductionist. They reduce things. So one of the things that one of the metaphors that I like to use with authors is, imagine you're moving and you're packing up your kitchen. And some of those boxes are easy to label. Like you have a box that says, plates, and you have a box that says pots and pans or whatever. And there's at least one box in every room, but especially in my kitchen, that it's just, I have to settle for kitchen stuff. It's not quite accurate because there's like batteries and there's like recipe booklets and there's like appliance manuals and there's pencils and there's rubber bands and there's probably a few tools, maybe an old set of car keys. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff in there, and kitchen stuff isn't quite accurate, but it gets the box into the right room in my new house. That's what the cover is supposed to be doing for you. It doesn't need to spell everything out. I think once I tried to like list everything out on the side of the box, and after I quickly realized that I was going to run out of space, and then I was going to defeat the purpose of having the box labeled in the first place, because it's supposed to be easier than actually opening the box and looking at it, right? So think of your cover in that way. You just need it to get you into the right room, if that makes sense.
And I was gonna add, because you had mentioned like labels, right? Humans love labeling things, but it's so arbitrary, right? Birds.
Right.
How many different types of birds just ran through me? There's owls, there's hummingbirds, there's parrots, ostriches.
Nobody thinks of ostriches when they think of birds, right?
And then there's emus, there's swans, and then right? I mean, there's so many, and like birds is science fiction, right? I mean,
right. And it's broad. And there's room for you. You just have to figure out which room you need to get them in front of. You have to find out which audience is going to enjoy what you've put into your book. All
right. So I know my book genre. I know who the audience is. I've got an idea of my kind of cover, but I need to find the right cover designer to make all that happen. So in a moment, I'm going to ask Rebecca how to find the right cover designer and how to start building a really efficient and effective working relationship. But first, let's hear tonight's book spotlight from Keylene.
Alrighty. This week is brought to you by Cover Your Book, an author's guide to working with a designer to maximize your sales, by R. Haskell. Struggling to find the right cover designer? Learn how the right cover will make your book the bestseller you've always wanted. Unsure how to find a good cover for your novel? Do you wish there was an easy way to find the right designer and communicate your vision effectively? Professional book cover designer and illustrator Rebecca Haskell has helped hundreds of authors gain attention to their work and, more importantly, sell more books. Let her show you how to work with a designer to achieve the cover your book deserves. Through a step-by-step explanation ranging from beginner to advanced, Cover Your Book gives you the inside track on how to turn your vision into a cover that sells itself. In this book, you'll discover how to distill your story into a killer concept that will captivate readers, where to find the designer that is right for you and your story, how to write the perfect cover brief to communicate your ideas effectively, how to avoid common pitfalls that can cost you time and money, why where you go is as important as who you hire.
I've got to change that line.
What to do when things go wrong, and so much more. Finally, you won't have to guess about your cover. You won't have to rely on others to tell you if your cover works. You will know. With the right designer, the entire process becomes one of fun and discovery. And in the end, the right cover will lead to more sales and better reviews. If you like detailed guides with tons of with tons of examples, images, and a touch of humor, then you will love R. Haskell's inside look at the design process that creates the cover you've always imagined. Buy Cover Your Book today and start finding the readers to buy your book.
Kayleen, that was fantastic. That was fabulous.
Thank you.
Well done. You're a good narrator.
Oh, thank you. Yay!
Can I get the teacher to repeat the question?
How do we find the right cover designer? How do we find the right one? And start building a relationship.
Something somebody said in comments here, Guy said, brought something up, which is very relevant, is you got to figure out how much you can afford before you start looking for before reaching out to designers. And that's going to, there are a lot of things that are going to influence how much a cover is going to cost you. And most of those choices have to do with genre. You have to decide whether you want your cover to be photocomposited, whether you're okay with 3D renderings, or whether you want an illustration. You have to figure out whether you're going to go full custom, you want the whole taco, or if you are willing to settle for something that's more off the rack, And all of those things are going to be affected by how much you can spend. Also, things like whether or not it's photocomposite or whether it's illustrated is sometimes determined by your specific genre. For instance, and this is where genre research really comes in handy. I really recommend that authors study the bestseller lists, the Amazon bestseller lists. Goodreads is a good resource too, but you can keep more on top of current trends in genres on the Amazon bestseller lists. By make sure you're looking at Kindle. Okay, make sure you're looking at ebooks, not just paperbacks, because that can be just a whole different thing. And see what the covers look like in your genre that are selling really well. What kind of language are authors using that's really reaching readers right now in that genre? For instance, if you are writing contemporary romance, you're going to need something that's photo manipulated. You're going to need photocomposite. Illustration is just not common in that genre, and it's a real risk to go for illustration in that genre. In fantasy does do some photocomposite, but they tend to prefer, well, not just fantasy. I'm talking about like epic fantasy, non-contemporary fantasy tends to like illustrated work. And so science fiction does as well. Science fiction is a little bit more tolerant of 3D art than fantasy is, and definitely more than like contemporary romance. But if you get into like paranormal romance and some of the more fantasy or science fiction influenced subgenres of romance, you have a little bit more flexibility there of what you can use. It's not like strict just photos only. But so study your genre to see what the standard is, what is really speaking to readers. And these things, they're trends and they do shift. They don't shift super fast, but it is something that you need to keep an eye on and you need to research before you start the cover process. So once you know, that'll narrow it down for you a little bit. If you know that you want a custom, let's say you want a custom illustrated cover, that's going to narrow you down a lot further because there are only a handful of us who do fully illustrated covers in those genres. If you're more open about whether or not you want it photocomposited or 3D rendered or illustrated, those all come with different price tags too. Illustration, because the skill level required to create them is so high, and because usually the custom illustration process is lengthy. There's a lot of pretty time intensive. It's going to be a lot more expensive than just getting than a photocomposite for the same genre will probably be, and definitely more expensive than a pre-made is.
So what are the age ranges, the price ranges on those?
Pre-made, pre-made covers. I want to reiterate to authors, pre-made covers are a legitimate choice for you no matter what your genre is. I know that there are some genres in which authors are a little bit more comfortable going for pre-mades. For instance, fantasy authors don't tend to want pre-mades. They tend to really want custom work because they want it to be really specific to their vision, and that is totally cool. But if you're a fantasy author who doesn't have the coin to drop on a custom illustration, it's okay. You can find a fantasy pre-made, and a good fantasy pre-made will sell your book just as well as a custom illustration will. So a lot of that is going to be your own personal preference and what flexibility your budget gives. But if you're going for pre-mades, which is something that I always recommend especially for authors who are just starting out, because one of the difficulties with custom work is that you have a lot more opportunity to ruin it or to get in your own way, get in your cover's way, get in your book's own way. So if you're really not sure, you don't feel like you have enough expertise to know what is market driven, what's going to sell your book, and you can't divorce yourself from that just yet, pre-mades are an excellent way to just bypass that whole thing right there. So pre-made covers in general range from, it's a rough estimate, but about $50 to $500, okay, depending on who you go to. Most of it will fall in between the $100 and $300 range. It gets up towards $500 for some of the more in-demand designers. I know there are designers who their custom work is booked out for a year or two, and if you want one of their covers, you're going to have to get a pre-made. And so their pre-mades can like command quite a lot of money, but I wouldn't go for anything less than $50. I'm not saying that it's not good. I'm saying the likelihood of it being good just kind of goes down below that mark there. You know what I'm saying?
So if they're also using the, oh my god, words, like deposit photos, where they're taking them, you might run into the situation where maybe those photos aren't actually legal to be using, or they're on 10,000 different covers.
Deposit Photos is a reputable stock site, so if
no, it is. Yeah, don't get me wrong.
They source from Deposit Photos, it's fine. What you want to avoid is either you or your designer using free stock sites. Free stock sites, super sticky. You just never know if they're there legitimately, and you don't want to be on the bad end of finding out that the artwork on your book is stolen. I've seen it happen. I've seen authors find out that the artwork on their cover was stolen, and it's devastating. And it in some cases they were out thousands of dollars because they printed books and merchandise with that cover, only to find out they can't sell any of it, and they have to take it all down and buy a new cover. It's a really bad situation. Micro stock sites like Deposit Photos, Shutterstock, that sort of thing, they're really not very expensive. They're $2 or $3 an image. Usually you have to buy them in like packs of 10 or more, but really not terribly expensive. So there's no reason to go the riskier route of free stock. Back to the issue of price. Custom covers can range from, I want to say, $150 to $200 for pretty basic, more beginner work, to thousands of dollars for custom photo shoots. There are some authors who they hire their own photographers, their own models. They have the costumes handmade, bespoke costumes for their photo shoots, and that will cost thousands of dollars. If that's what you want, go for it. Somebody can provide that for you. Illustration generally comes in anywhere between $500 and $1,500. If you are getting illustration for less than $500, unless they're just like they're really, really starting out in the industry, they haven't yet don't have a client base yet, and they're trying to build something. They're beginners. I just wouldn't go a whole lot cheaper than that, because you do start to get into, there's a shady area, okay, of every industry. And if you bargain hunt too hard, you will find yourself in the middle of that shady area, because every industry has people who are unscrupulous and who are just trying to make a quick buck, and that's not what you want to do with your cover. I think for illustration around $400 or $500, depending on who you're hiring, it can go up to $10,000. If you want to cover from a god like Don DeSantos or something, you're going to pay $10,000 for it.
Right. Well, these covers, they take a long time. You're giving this person money, but they're giving you a lot of time. And if it's a work that can take hours and hours, and not just the time can add up. Yeah, not just in the drawing, but also in the communicating, and in the I had this vision, and now when I see it, I don't like it, and now I have a new vision, and that communicating back and forth can end up taking a lot of people's time, both the authors and the illustrators.
Yeah, a good brief can help you get through that, though. I know a lot of people are worried. Well, it's really intimidating to hire an artist because there's this fear. What if I put down all of this money and I don't get what I want on the other end? And there's a lot of things that you can do to prevent that from ever happening.
Mhm.
I don't know where you want to go with our topics. I'm following
curious about this.
Yeah,
I'm curious.
that's a really good point.
What's this brief, and then how do we set it up, and then how do we get our vision communicated to the illustrator, and then to get it on the paper?
The first thing that you want to do is you want to look for somebody who has an established web presence. Okay, I know that there are a lot of people who work solely off of Facebook or Etsy, or Etsy is a little bit better, or other sites that have a lower barrier of entry. But what you're looking for is you're looking for someone who has invested in their business because they have something to lose if they don't treat you fairly. They have reputation to lose if they don't treat you fairly. So if a designer has just, opened an account on Fiverr or whatever, and they run afoul of a customer and it goes south, when there's low barrier to entry like that, it's easy enough to just shut down the account, open up another account with another name, and go on your merry way. You know what I'm saying? So if someone has they've invested something in their business, they have a logo, they have a website, they look like they've invested in themselves as a brand, they have something on the line. They have a reputation on the line. They have something to lose. And so that there's more of an assurance that you're not going to be taken for a ride. Now, this isn't to say that you can't be treated unethically by somebody who has a website, or that everybody who just operates off of Facebook is going to be unethical, but it does help stack the odds a little bit in your favor. And we're not just talking about being scammed, being outright taken for a ride, but also sometimes you don't get what you want because of miscommunication, or because you find halfway through the project you've just hired the wrong designer. And the way you can avoid that is you need make sure that your designer has a fair-sized portfolio of work that they've done, either custom work that they've done or pre-mades that they've produced. And you want to be sure that whatever it is you're looking for specifically, there is an example of something, not the details, like she needs to have red hair and blue pants or whatever, but stuff in your genre that has the tone of what you're looking for. You need example. You should go with someone that has actual examples of the work, the kind of work that you're looking for in their portfolio, so you have proof that they can do what you need them to do. If you find yourself in the position to be asked, this is a question I've been asked many times by authors, is, I see you're a designer, can you do fill in the blank? You should never have to ask that question of a designer. The evidence that they can do it should be in their portfolio, or you should not hire them for that job. Because if they have, they've demonstrated that they can produce the kind of work that you need, you're much less likely to find out that they can't do what you need them to do. And just because you're a competent designer in one genre doesn't mean that you're going to be great in another one. Everybody has their strengths. They have things that they're good at, that they've practiced in. For instance, one of my weaknesses is I'm not fabulous at nonfic. I can do it. I'm I did the cover of my own nonfic, but I'm probably not the best person to bet on when it comes to nonfiction. I don't have a whole lot of practice in that genre. It's not just not one of my strengths. If you need science fiction or fantasy, I am the woman to come to. But nonfic, I have a couple of other names I could give you. So just because somebody is competent in one area doesn't mean they're competent in all areas. So really vet that portfolio really, really well. The third thing is make sure you're going to want to talk to the designer before you book them. If it's going to be custom work, talk to the designer, and make sure that you have an idea of what their process is and that they're willing to allow you to be involved in the process. I have heard just stories that I've heard of people hiring an illustrator That illustrator then disappears for 3 months and emerges from the ether with a fully finished cover that is maybe not what the client really was looking for. It's because they had no opportunity to weigh in on the sketch phase or the rough paint phase. Make sure that whoever you're working with is comfortable with showing you mock-ups, letting you provide some guidance as the cover takes form, because the best kind of working relationship with a client is a collaborative one. It is a creatively collaborative effort, and you create it between the two of you because you know your book better than the designer does. The designer knows art and marketing, hopefully, and knows marketing. You know your book, and together that's all necessary knowledge, and together you can come together and create the perfect cover for your book. But if you're not allowed to be part of that process, the chances of you ending up with a cover you can't use go up. So I think those would be my main points: is make sure you're hiring somebody reputable. If you're curious about an author's reputation, ask around. Facebook is a wonderful resource for. Facebook has its drawbacks, but one of the things it's great at is community building. And the communities of authors and communities of designers are fantastic. And if you want to find out, hey, is this somebody that's good to work with? Go and ask in 20 books. I don't know if 20 books allows questions like that, so I better not say that.
Indie cover projects, maybe.
Indie cover project, the cover clinic, the book cover gallery. I don't know if the gallery is the right place to ask that either.
See, but all of those groups, you can search them. You can search. You can find files and all of that.
Right, or look at their portfolio and find out who they've worked with, and then contact those authors and say, "Hey, how did you enjoy that process? Did that go smoothly? Is there anything that I should be worried about? Was it difficult? Kind of give me a heads up on how it is to work with this designer, and find out what their actual experience with the designer was." You can absolutely do your research. There is nothing wrong with checking up on your designer and finding out what the reputation in the community is. So.
And once you found your designer and you started that relationship and you decided this is the one, what is this brief that you've mentioned a couple times, and how can we set one up?
First of all, your designer's probably not going to read your book. That is, for beginning authors, I find that is a common misconception. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First, because the cover is not a visual extension of your book. So the full text isn't as useful as a synopsis is. A synopsis can just be, or a blurb can be much, much more illuminating for your designer. One of the hard parts about for you as an author figuring out what should be on your cover is pulling things out of the book, saying, no, that's not going to go on the cover. No, trying to distill it. It's kind of the same process you go through when you're trying to create a blurb and you're trying to distill your book down to its most relevant, salient points. That's really, really hard. I don't know how many of you have tried to write a blurb, but it's hard trying to condense a whole novel down into something as small as a blurb. And you have to go through a similar process with a book. So if you feel tempted to give your cover designer a 7-page, dossier, it's probably not the right call. You're going to overwhelm them with information when what they really just need is they just need a few more relevant. The other point is it's the ROI. I don't have the time. I have an hourly rate, and if you want to pay me that hourly rate, I might read your book, but it's going to take me that much longer to create. Honestly, I have met a few authors who just dead set their designer needs to read the book, or otherwise they won't know what the book is really about. Ask your designer what their hourly rate is. I guarantee you it will probably double or triple the price of the cover. And if that's the road you want to go down and you find a designer who's willing to do it for you, then, Godspeed, more power to you. But what you do want to put in your brief is you want to have your blurb, okay, or something blurb like that kind of reduces the plot, the characters, the plot problem, the villain, the setting, etc. And you're also going to want to describe those things. I have a form that I send out to my clients for them to fill out. I have a field for them to fill out the synopsis or the blurb, and then I ask for because many covers in most genres, the best-selling covers tend to be character focused. That's not always the case, but it is often the case. So I need a physical description of the main character and maybe of one or two secondary characters. I start to twitch a little bit if an author wants to fit more than 3 characters on a cover, because there's this thing happens. The human eye really, really wants to be able to prioritize what is the most important thing in an image. And when it can't do that, you get this vague kind of uncomfortable feeling. You don't want somebody to feel vaguely uncomfortable while looking at your cover, because they'll look away is what they'll do if they can't figure out. That's one of the reasons why it's also really important to not clutter the design with too many design elements, there needs to be a spaceship battle, and he's got to have a laser sword, and there's got to be a monster, pare it back, because the human eye really wants to know what is the most important thing in this image. And especially the more human figures you put on the cover, the harder it is to figure that out. So I ask for the physical description for the main character and maybe a couple of secondary characters. I ask for a setting description. One of the things that I have noticed happens even with my current clients that I've done maybe 5, 6, 10 books with. They'll send me a brief and I'll have to respond to them. I was like, thank you for sharing with me their personality traits. Can you tell me what their hair color is? Remember, the thing is, as authors, I mean, you're writing on a very abstract level, but art is visual. I need to know what the hair color, the eye color, the build, what the skin color is. So while it can be helpful to know a little bit of their personality and maybe some of their inner journey, the most important thing for me to know is what they look like. So make sure that you're giving your designer like visual cues, a visual description of everything. One of the great things that you can do to help your designer is the way authors are word people for the most part. Artists are image people. We're visual people. So one of my favorite things that a client does that helps me get on the right page with them is they'll give me comps. They'll give me examples of covers that are in their genre that they like. I really, really like this cover. I was thinking of something with this kind of color palette or whatever. I really like how in this cover the character is facing away from the viewer, and you can see like this big vista in the background, or whatever. If you send examples of covers that you enjoy, especially if you can be specific about why you enjoy them, like for instance, don't send a cover where what you like is the main character's face, and then your artist is like, well, we'll go with that color palette then. You know what I'm saying? So be specific what it is you like about them. But it helps us get a sense of what you're after, of what kind of books you would want your cover to look at home next to. And it also helps us get an idea of what your personal preferences are, because as much as we go on and on about how this is a marketing tool and it needs to serve the reader, I really, really want you to love it when I'm done. I want it to like do that thing to you where you're just like, this is everything I ever dreamed of. So if I can do both, if I can speak to your audience and I can speak to you, that's perfection. Those are my goals right there. I really want you to be deeply satisfied with the work that I do for you and to feel like that's the cover your book was always meant to have, So remember that artists are visual. We need visual details. And if you can actually give us images, that's awesome. Like I have a client who he'll send me images of the actress he had in mind for his main character's role or his side character's role. The actress that he had in mind, I like this actress in this movie, and he'll send me screenshots from the movie of the woman he had in mind. I'm like, okay, I can do that. That is, you're speaking my language, you know. So those visual examples can be really good, but make sure to be clear about the setting. Like often novels will have more than one setting. So if you want to put a couple in there, and it is, as much as I say try to be flexible, it is okay to have some concepts in mind of something that you think might be cool. I actually do prefer it when clients have thought about it and what they think would be a cool concept. And then just as long as you're not married to it and you can run it by me, and I can tell you that will almost work if we change this little detail here, and then that will make a really striking image, or that's not going to work for reasons, you know, and we can collaborate on that. But if you have an idea of what would look cool on the cover, you know, send it my way, shoot it by me, and we'll talk about it.
So synopsis of the book, character description, particularly physical, other comparable covers that you might, you know, like that fit your genre, that are kind of like what you're looking for in the book. All of this is helpful in the brief. Anything else about what you'd like the cover to look like, or do you just put that all in your cover designer's hands and let them kind of figure it out?
I do like details on what you would like the cover to look like, so long as there is an understanding that we can be flexible on it. If I get a bullet point list of this needs to be here, we need a butterfly in the upper right corner with, you know, purple mountains in the distance, purple, okay? And her hair needs to like hit mid back right about where her bra band would be, but no lower than that, you know, okay? At that point, we need to leave, just, it's totally okay to have ideas. You're going to have ideas, okay? What author doesn't have ideas of what would look cool on their cover? And it's totally okay to share those with us, but leave some room for your designer to like interject some of their experience with art and their expertise as a cover designer. If you leave room for them so that you can both work on it together, that you have a better chance of ending up with a cover that will actually sell your book.
All right, so you get that initial image going, and then what's the next step in creating a cover with your designer?
Usually before the brief happens, there will usually be a booking, and there will usually be some exchange of money. That's fair. Most artists will want at least some money up front to secure your place on their schedule, okay? Because especially if they're booked out a few, especially if they're booked out in advance, you taking up a spot in their schedule means somebody else can't, okay? So if you back out of it, they're going to be out of that, and it's going to cause problems with paying the rent. Does that make sense? So a little bit of money up front is totally industry standard. You should not feel like that's totally legit. So don't worry about that if your designer has asked for money up front. Then at that point, they usually ask you for when they've booked you and your booking date has come around. If they're booked out, then they'll come to you. You'll send the brief, and usually at that point, you'll give them some time to create some mock-ups. Usually for photocomposite or 3D art, they'll create mock-ups using low-res images. Okay, so they'll be a little grainy and pixelated, and they might have some watermarks on them. But it's just to give you the general idea of the concept they're looking for. Usually an artist they'll give you at least one concept. Some artists will give you more than one concept, but one concept is fairly standard. And if the concept just doesn't work for you at all, most artists will be willing to go back and show you another one. But usually that's just the starting off point. For an illustrator, it will be a sketch. They'll send you either a sketch or a very rough paint of it, and you'll have to use a little bit of imagination to imagine what it will look like.
Yeah, they're going to be stick figures and all these lines, and you have to be like, I see a person. That seems like a person.
You just squint real hard. It looks like a cover. And you'll have to use a little bit of imagination. If you're having a real hard time visualizing it, refer back to their portfolio and remind yourself they can do this. Yeah. They can make it look finished. So depending on the comfort zone of my clients, like I have some clients who have just a really hard time making that leap in their head from the sketch to the final piece. So I'll actually go a little further into the concept and I'll finish it out a little bit more because I know they struggle a little bit with visualizing that. So if you know yourself, you have a hard time making the leap from super rough to complete, let your designer know and they might be able to help you out a little bit. What we want to avoid as artists is we want to avoid doing a lot of work that's going to end up wasted because you don't end up liking the concept or whatever. Once you've chosen your mock-up or your sketch, you've chosen your concept, I want to reiterate, this is usually a point of no return, okay? Because at this point, your illustrator is going to paint it, or your designer is going to buy the images and start the painstaking, laborious, and highly skilled process of putting it together and making it look good. So if after they've done all that work, you change your mind and you're like, you know what, I would rather have a different model on the cover, that's too bad because the work has already been done. If you're really dead set on, if you are just like, I've made a terrible mistake, I think we should go with a different concept. If you are willing to pay them for the work that they have done and then pay them to do it again, that's totally an option. Designers are happy to work with you. What we don't want to do is we don't want to go unpaid for 10 hours. 10 hours of work that doesn't get paid. That's what we're trying to avoid. So, but that is one of the important parts of making sure that you can communicate well with your designer and that you have a style of communication that works well. It's one of the reasons why it's a good idea to exchange a couple of emails with them or talk to them a little bit on Facebook Messenger to make sure that you guys can communicate. I do have one client who likes to call me. And we talk on the phone for about an hour this was more important at the beginning of our relationship because he wanted to make sure that I had the same images in my head that he did. He's like, so what kind of movies have you watched? What kind of books do you read? What kind of media do you expose yourself to and what do you enjoy? So that he knew that I'm kind of in the same mental space that he is for his paintings. It worked out really, really well for us. I know that there's a lot of designers who'd be like, never, okay? A lot of us artists are very shy as well.
Personal space.
A phone call can clear up so much communication issues in a lot less time than emails or worse, texting back and forth.
Most designers are going to want most of the communication to be done in emails simply for the fact because we need a record. We need a record of what you asked for and when.
Yep. I just went through that.
Right. First of all, to make sure that we don't forget. Like for me, I'm a word person. When you tell me something, I don't remember it. If I read it, I will remember it forever. So I really need those. So what I would do with my client who wanted the phone call is I'd take notes while we were on the phone, and then afterwards I would send him an email. I was like, just to recap, we discussed this and this and this. Can you fill the holes in for me? And he would remind me of some things that I had forgotten to put in, or some details that I'd gotten too busy talking to him and had forgotten to write on my notepad or whatever. And but we do want a record of it for our own benefit, so that we make sure that we get everything in there that you want. We consider everything that you want us to consider, but also so that if there is any miscommunication, any confusion or misunderstandings, we can refer back to our paper trail. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, speaking of paper trail, Guy Anthony DeMarco points out it's important that you agree up front what the deliverables will be, like ebook and wraparound print. Will you get layered Photoshop file, etc.?
That is very important. And just on the word of layered Photoshop files, it's really hard to get a designer to part with those, a layered Photoshop file. First of all, it depends on what you mean by a layered Photoshop file. If you mean the layers of the artwork, like you want the background and the foreground and the effects to all be on different layers of the artwork, that's something that most artists are probably not going to give you, okay? Unless you're willing to pay extra for it. You're probably going to have to pay extra if you want it, because what we're doing is we're basically surrendering to you the right of modification. Somebody with a layered Photoshop file generally feels like they have the right to change the artwork. It's implied, in when the artwork is layered, but sorry, my brain just wiped.
It's okay. It happens to me every show, at least 5 times.
ADD.
Why they won't give
what-
you a layered Photoshop file?
Right. So there's a couple of reasons why it can be hard to get that from. First of all, is if my name is on a piece of artwork or on a cover or whatever, and you go and mess with it after we're done, okay? Your cover, if you take off my text and you put Comic Sans, okay, that reflects on me as a designer, and people are going to look at it and be like, I thought Rebecca Haskell did that cover. I thought she was a lot better than that. You know what I'm saying? Don't make me look bad. So there are clients that I have that I trust them, but I've told them all, I was like, don't make me look bad. You know what I'm saying? So that's a risk that we assume that it could damage our reputation. And usually that's often, not always, that's a risk that your designer will be willing to take if the price is right.
That is true. I mean, from an author standpoint, we give beta or alpha reads, right? And they're like, well, just send me the Word file.
I don't know about that.
You want direct access to copy and paste all the words that I've spent all this time writing.
I don't like that. Yeah.
Right? So it's the same thing.
You bring that up, and this is something that especially right now, I wish I could communicate to all writers. We are the same. Artists and writers, we are so similar in the things that we want. We want to be able to create awesome stuff. We want recognition for our work. We want create an element of creative freedom. We want some control over over the work that we send out into the world. And I understand that gets a little sticky because you're kind of trying to share the same space with someone else who also wants that control. And that's where negotiation and having a contract really comes in handy. I really, really strongly believe that you shouldn't go into this process without an agreement of some sort. It doesn't need to be a huge, long contract full of legalese, okay, that you need to run by your attorney or whatever. But there needs to be the most important part, because honestly, a $350 cover is that's not legally actionable. Nobody's going to sue you over a $350 cover, okay? But the most important, I don't know that for sure, okay? So don't risk it.
One of the.
Sure. But it's one of the biggest benefits that you have if you've entered into agreement with your designer is that you're both on the same page. You both know what to expect. The things that you want to cover in your agreement is like I think it was Guy who suggested this is what are you going to receive? How long is it going to take? What files can you expect to receive? How much input do you get into? Are you going to be given an opportunity to look at it and then give them guidance as they're working on it? But having some kind of agreement in place so that you're both on the same page, you know what to expect of them, they know what to expect of you. That is one of the biggest benefits to having an agreement. And that can be an informal agreement if you're not comfortable with a contract. It can be like the whole I sign, you sign thing. If you're more comfortable with that, work that out with your designer. But having some kind of agreement is really, really important.
All right. So at the end of the day, our cover designers are writers with pictures. Okay. Yeah. They want to create that story, that imagery that's going to pull a reader to immerse a reader in their work, which is going to get them into your book. And picking the right cover designer, I mean, it's going to take time. You're going to need to look at their portfolios. You're going to need to look at what your genre is. If you don't know what your genre is, that's going to be more work on your end to figure out, where you're going to go. Is it going to be illustrated? Is it going to be Photoshop with images? Is it going to be 3D rendered? Are you going to have people? Are you going to have spaceships if you have spaceships? All of this right in the beginning of the show, magic colors matter. Yeah. Green apparently is very witchy. If you don't have witches, stay away from green.
Urban fantasy really likes purple. Purple is just a really big urban purples and blues. Urban fantasy tends that. So sometimes somebody will come to me with I'm part of a group called the Cover Clinic, where we'll help authors troubleshoot their covers and try to help them improve the design of their covers. And one of the things, somebody will come to me with an orange urban fantasy cover that has orange and yellows, and I'm like, that really, I mean, it's beautiful, it just doesn't hit genre, you know. So a lot of those details matter, and they're things that you wouldn't necessarily think of unless this was what you did for a living, you know. But again, what you said, designers want the same thing that you want. We want your book to sell like hotcakes. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it would do great things.
Your work is in everybody's hands. It's like it's the first thing people see. That's what's going to make them pick it up.
If you end up with a book on the top 100 in the store, okay, that's going to do great things for me. Okay, so that's what I want. I want that. You know, we have the same goal, you know, and when we're approaching the creative product as creators, we're approaching it with a lot of the same motives and a lot of the same desires that an author approaches their creative work with. So just keep that in mind. I know that it can sometimes, especially because there's money exchanged, you know, it can feel like a little bit of an us versus them, especially if there's a struggle over what rights do I get. It can feel like a little bit of an us versus them, but ultimately our goals are the same. I wanted to add one thing just because I know my photo composite friends are going to kill me. Design friends are going to kill me if I don't mention this about the layered files. There's one other reason why they wouldn't be able to give you layered files. If they have used stock images in the art, it is against the license that we agree to with the stock company to give you the artwork in a format that you could extract those stock photos. So what we're doing when we're dealing with stock photos, it also comes with when an author wants to get all of the rights from the artist. Sometimes we don't have all the rights to give you, you know, because we have licensed the stock photos on a conditional, limited basis from the stock photo company. So keep that in mind. You usually, there are ways to get around that. So just discuss it with your designer. If you have concerns in that area, ask them what's possible, you know, and we can talk about it.
All right, so we are a little bit over, which is okay. We like going over. We got 13 people watching us right now, by the way. I don't know if you noticed. But can you let our viewers, listeners know where they can find you? Because Rebecca is, as she has stated throughout the whole show, a cover designer herself, specifically in the science fiction and fantasy genres is her shtick. Where can they find you?
They can find me at vividcovers.com. I'm also on Facebook. If you search for Rebecca Haskell, I don't know what the URL is, but Vivid Covers also has a Facebook group. We're facebook.com groups/Vivid Covers. You can hang out with us there too. So, and if you have any questions about, listen, I have written a whole book trying to help authors navigate this process as painlessly as possible and get what they want. So if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, if you feel stuck, if you're scared, you know, if you don't know what to do, you know, if you're struggling with something and you're not sure what the right thing to do is, if you have any questions, hit me up. I will answer them. I'm here for you.
All right. And for everybody listening, that book is Cover Your Book, An Author's Guide to Working with a Designer to Maximize Your Sales by R. Haskell. Definitely pick it up. Everybody hit the subscribe button, ding the little bell. We really want to get to 1,000 subscribers this year. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for being on the show. And everybody, yes, and everybody out there, breathe. You know, ask the questions. You know, if you have a worry, voice it. You know, if you do it in a respectful way, hey, I was just wondering. Your designer wants to have those questions. They want you to be just as comfortable with the process, you know, as they want to know as much about your book and your vision to get you the best design. All right. For Lauren Moore, I'm Kayleen Williams. This has been another great episode. Definitely unique. We got to touch on the cover designers out there. They do not get enough love because they are the first thing that you see. And I had this whole thing planned, and now I'm just a great guide. All right. Everybody, reading, writing, everything in between, all that jazz.